I've heard talk, including in Congress, that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with DPWH contractors, and that certain members of Secretary Dizon's teams are, in fact, contractors.
Welcome po sa Opinion TVPH channel. Mga kababayan, sabay-sabay po natin panoorin ang balitang ito at sama-sama tayong mag-react sa comment section. Please support my channel. Like, share, and subscribe.
Una po sa lahat, nandito po ako dahil trabaho ko na gawin ang lahat para sa ating distrito, tulad ng ibang mga kongresista. At marami po akong nakikitang mga dapat na reforma sa ating sistema. Bilang isang congressman, layunin ko na makakuha ang aking distrito ng fair share ng budget at ang ibang mga distrito ay dapat mabigyan din ng fair share. At pangalawa, gusto ko lang din naman ibaba ang presyo ng DPWH projects, sinabi ko po, ng 25% para maiwasan ang posibleng 150 billion pesos ng kickbacks. Kaya anuman ang susunod kong sasabihin ay nasa konteksto na may solusyon naman. At sinasabi ko po ito para sana tumulong si DPWH Secretary Vince Dizon sa mga solusyon na ito. My first point today is that contractors are part of writing the DPWH budget and allegedly pay DPWH officials for budgetary allocations from the non-allocable or so-called leadership fund that is prepared by the DPWH. And as I will say more about later, I heard that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with contractors, and in the interest of transparency, should disclose all of their connections with contractors and any knowledge that they have on the possibility of kickbacks from DPWH projects. So that is the main point that I would like to bring up today that I will say more about later, that I am asking Secretary Vince Dizon to disclose any and all of his and his team's connections with current, past, or potential future contractors of DPWH projects. Because of the scrutiny on insertions in Congress and Senate, insertions have now moved to the National Expenditure Program that is supposedly prepared by only the DPWH. And according to flood control hearings, contractors submit lists of projects to DPWH, and payments are made as early as when they appear in the NEP, on the presumption that the district engineering offices will award the contracts to the contractors that pay for the projects to be inserted by the DPWH officials into the NEP. When DPWH was writing the 2026 NEP, my staff received Viber messages that I can ask that we share on the screen from my former district engineer. The Viber messages read, ito po yung isang 1B na for funding. Hiningi po ng isang contractor na tutulong magpa-release ng funds. Above is the list of proposed projects worth 600 million for a certain contractor. Yan ma'am ay dadalhin sa inyo at siya daw ang mag-aasikaso. Ito nga pala, dati na ding may nag-aasikaso ng pondo pero wala pa namang bumabalik sa amin na letter kung denied or hindi. Contractor sa regional office ang nag-request niyan dati ma'am, last year pa. And what we found out when the net came was one of the non-allocable projects of DPWH in my district. Perhaps kasama ito sa leadership funds na binanggit ni former Secretary Bonoan sa Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearing. The point being that if this was how the NEP was written in my district, na bago lumabas ang NEP, Pinakita sa akin ng isang DPWH official na ito ay ipapasok ng kontraktor at yan ay lumabas at nakatag as non-allocable, meaning hindi po ito proposed ng congressman. Ito po ay hindi nga magagalaw, kaya nga non-allocable ang tawag ng congressman. Ito po ay ipinasok ng DPWH na may pruweba tayo na galing sa kontraktor. Baka sa ibang distrito, ang mga contractors ay may mga insertions din sa 2026 budget, which if we tie it together with the testimonies in the Senate Blue Ribbon Committee hearings na sabi daw nagkakaroon ng mga kickbacks paglabas pa lang ng NEP, it could well have been that there have already been projects that have been paid for in the 2026 NEP. And you could surmise there would be even more in other districts because the contractors, of course, don't have history dealing with me and would tend to put their projects in a district that the congressman will not interfere in rigging their bids in favor of them. And while I was newly elected, I was approached by people saying that contractors were in talks with DPWH to download or magpababa ng mga proyekto sa distrito ko. I have also heard that many of the projects being implemented from the 2025 budget in my district were also inserted this way, again, not through congressional insertions, but mga ipinasok ni Regional Director, ni USEC, baka mga kaibigan ni Secretary. This, I think the public should know, is how the DPWH budget, at least in my district, was written. Based on what I was told, may mga contractor na may mga kakilala daw sa DPWH na nagpapasok ng mga projects. At again, weaving it together with the Senate testimonies, meron konsiderasyon. Kaya ipinapasok mga ito ng DPWH at ang mga contractor ngayon ang nakakakuha ng mga kontratang ito. And that it's the officials in DPWH who have been reportedly engaging in these transactions. And that the consequence from a policy standpoint is because my district will not allow rigging of bids, then this portion of the budget, which is non-allocable, which the DPWH can put in districts of their choosing, will not be put in districts like mine, where there is no rigging of bids. And so, the tendency would be for these projects to be parked in the districts where they have the highest confidence that they can earn the most if their objective, which they can disprove, and we would be glad if they could disprove, is to earn from these projects. So this happened in the 2026 NEP that was submitted in July, in the time of Secretary Bonoan. And Secretary Dizon submitted a revised NEP in September of 2025 for 2026. And last Friday, the media asked him what changes he plans to make about the 2026 budget, and if it is safe to say that the 2026 budget is not yet stripped from insertions and leadership funds. And Secretary Dizon said, "My problem with the 2026 budget is it's no longer in our hands. And to be quite frank, I had zero part in that budget at all. I came in, it was already submitted, I was given a week to review it to submit a new budget. For 2027 moving forward, we're definitely going to review all these processes, all this formula, because these cannot continue." And I'm hoping that Secretary Dizon will use the time available to revise the 2026 budget, particularly the projects that can be traced to the non-allocable leadership funds, that he knows what they are because those files are available in DPWH because of the evidence that there has been some undesirable process for how projects were inserted into the DPWH budget with the input of interested contractors. So we have established that contractors insert projects into the DPWH NEP, and the question then is why? What motive would someone have not to touch these projects? I would add further that Secretary Dizon also added many new projects in the NEP, replacing some projects from Secretary Bonoan, and that information on these projects were committed to be shared in congressional budget hearings, but these have not yet been shared. Secretary Dizon said that as I will show in a video later, these projects would be disclosed. But if I can share the...
We will give you the copies, Madam Chair, no, of this. No, I don't have them off the bat right now, but we will provide the details to the Honorable Committee po. Yes, I think that will be readily available naman po. Just to make it very clear, breakdown per legislative district for the 2024 General Appropriations Act, the 2025 General Appropriations Act, and the current submission for the 2026 National Expenditure Program per legislative district. We will comply, Madam Chair, according to our staff po.
So, first, there were requests by members of Congress for certain budgets to be disclosed. What the past budgets of Secretary Bonoan were, and what the new budget, including that proposed by Secretary Dizon, were. And these are actually derivable from the publicly available data. But for some reason, even after these are publicly committed that they would be shared, they have not yet been shared, and would be very important actually for members of Congress to see if the budget was equitably distributed, and if there is a large allocation in some places, and if we can also see the data on if there was are non-allocable and who is the proponent of those non-allocable projects, then the public could help in scrutinizing if there is some potential interest by some parties for certain projects. And I actually have here the data that was requested by some members of Congress. And again, they have this data. They have given me this data before. Others can also derive this data, and others can also derive it without needing any special processing. So it's curious why they're not sharing at least the data on the budget per legislative district. I believe the Senate budget hearing of DPWH is next Monday, and I don't want to be the one that shares this data. I'm asking that before further deliberations on the DPWH budget, Secretary Dizon will do what he said he would do and share this publicly available derivable data on the budget per legislative district. But that, beyond that, he also share the data on what is allocable and non-allocable in each district's budget, because as was seen in the slide on the screen earlier, each congressman is told what projects in his district are allocable, meaning he can amend them, and what projects are non-allocable, which, again, I'm putting the spotlight on, is what DPWH has control over and should actually be subject to more scrutiny. And again, the question is, why is there lack of a transparency on sharing of this data? Perhaps because when this data is shared, along with who are the proponents for certain projects, then the public will have more leads on potential issues on those given projects. And again, it's an open secret that there is lobbying, or one can say more generously, that there are proposals for the benefit of districts by politicians. None of us, of course, will deny this because that's what each elected representative tries to do for their constituents, to try and bring in projects for their district. For some reason, though, the DPWH denies that politicians make proposals that are accepted in the NEP, even though former DPWH officials admit it, but that at least if we can play this part of the video, the last part of the video.
Please,
The last part.
Madam Nations Act and the current submission for the 2026 National Expenditure Program per register.
In this last
We will-
response, there is a denial.
According to our staff po, wala po silang alam, no? Na merong ganong mga proyekto.
So again, there has been a denial that politicians submit projects into the NEP, because maybe if they admit it, then they'll have to reveal who is the proponent of these projects in the NEP. But if there's so much scrutiny on insertions in Congress, we should be even more closely examining insertions in the NEP, because doing so might be for some purpose to avoid scrutiny in Congress. And again, even members of Congress don't deny that they try and do this for their own district. As I said in my prefatory speech, it is my job to bring in projects for my district. So it's just in our interest to propose that our district be given more support by the national government. What we're asking for is transparency on the requests that were approved, and then once we see that data, then there could be more scrutiny on why those particular requests were approved. So, moving on, the question is, what is the potential motive for someone not to disclose all this data? I mentioned earlier that Secretary Dizon's NEP added many new projects. You can see that there was a reduction in the flood control budget of Secretary Bonoan to Secretary Dizon, of course, by a very big amount. But there was additions in asset preservation and also in multipurpose buildings in a total amount of around 75 billion pesos that was also raised by other members of Congress. Perhaps those were erratas of certain members of Congress, but it would also be helpful if Secretary Dizon could give a breakdown between the July NEP of Secretary Bonoan and the September NEP of Secretary Dizon. What are the changes? And if he could kindly explain the changes between the two NEPs. So, to go to the main point. As to the potential underlying undercurrent for all this, I've heard talk, including in Congress, that Secretary Dizon and his team have connections with DPWH contractors, and that certain members of Secretary Dizon's teams are, in fact, contractors. I am not the authority on this subject, but I think that it would be good to give Secretary Dizon the opportunity to explain. Of course, everyone knows people. So to say that Secretary Dizon knows DPWH contractors is not to say that there's anything inappropriate happening. Now, if he or members of his team have some proven interest in companies with DPWH contracts, And what I heard is that it's not him who is a contractor, it's a member or members of his team who are contractors. And how exactly, I'm not the authority. But I have been told that this is actually known by many in Congress now. Then the question is, if it's true that new appointees in DPWH have interests in companies that do business with DPWH, are we sure that there will be no conflict of interest in the awarding of contracts under the new leadership at DPWH? And why then has this not been previously disclosed? Secretary Dizon is very accessible to the media, and I hope then that we can ask him to disclose all of his and his team's connections to DPWH contractors, and if he thinks there are still kickbacks in DPWH, and if he has ever discussed or been offered kickbacks, and if he could share this so that we can all work together to stop the practice of giving kickbacks. Again, you can't avoid knowing people, but if these people have contracts with DPWH, and in fact will win contracts in the months and years to come in DPWH, and that there is a reported history of kickbacks being given in DPWH, then I think it deserves more public scrutiny, especially because there are plans to decrease the projects being bid in the district engineering offices and move procurement to the regional or even central office. Could it be that these reforms in DPWH will not actually reduce corruption, but will transfer the benefits of it to another level or another group of parties or contractors? And again, I don't want to say this too authoritatively, but someone actually just told me before I arrived here now that not only did one person tell me that they heard that members of the team are actually contractors, that other members of the team have already been meeting with contractors outside of DPWH at may hinihingi na daw. So maybe Secretary Dizon can also check with all of his appointees who are the contractors, if any, that they have met since their appointment and what they discussed in those meetings. It's actually quite tragic because I know that so many people have so much hope for Secretary Dizon's leadership in the DPWH, as do I. And I hope then that he can be transparent on, even if it's not from him, but any attempted offers, any opportunities that he has had to talk with contractors or for his team to, any offers for kickbacks that have been made. So, again, this is all in the context of there being a history of this also happening in DPWH. And again, multiple sources telling me and saying that this is known already by many.